Next from Chicago, our contributing correspondent Jeff Berkowitz talks one-on-one with Republican candidate for governor, Senator Kirk Dillard. This runs about 30 minutes.
You're watching Public Affairs. Berkowitz is my name, and politics is our game. And as we said in the tease, we are going to do lots of politics and public policy because our guest tonight is State Senator Kirk Dillard. He, of course, is one of 4 candidates in the Republican primary, and he's the winner in that primary faces either, looks like as of now, Governor Pat Quinn, the incumbent, or Bill Daley, or maybe people are talking about somebody you know, okay?
Who's that?
Who's that? Who's in the state senate who they're talking about? Who's the guy who's running the pension committee now, the conference committee?
Kwame.
Kwame Raoul. Interestingly enough, Kwame, a lot of people don't realize that the Senate district he filled was Barack Obama's.
Right,
So-
you know, historic seat. Dick Newhouse was there, Harold Washington was there, so that seat
So
down
do you think
your
Kwame
alma
will get
mater,
in? Do you think Kwame will get in?
I don't know,
You know him pretty well.
I do know him well.
He's been strongly for labor. On that pension stuff, he's been hanging with labor. And there's nobody, and Quinn's been sort of battling with labor. Daley's been battling with labor. He could pick up that vote. He's pretty articulate, right?
He's smart, he's articulate. It would be interesting to see an African American as the candidate in the Democrat primary. So he'll give those guys a run for their
I
money.
think who's the easiest guy to beat, Quinn, Daley, or Kwame Raoul?
I don't know. I mean, I worry
take 'em
about
all
my
on,
own
yeah.
primary first, Jeff. I take them one step at a time, and I run on my own unique background, which we'll talk about
We'll talk
today.
get to your background in a second, but everybody's talking. We're taping this show on August 3rd, and as you know, the big issue is the state employee pension mess. Back in 2010, when you ran for governor, you came within 193 votes of winning that Republican primary, okay? You might even say it was like 95 votes if you count the switch. If you had won in 2010, what would you have done to get this state employee pension reform done?
Well, I know that pension reform would have been done, but for 193 votes, we wouldn't have had a 67% income tax increase. The redistricting would be very different, and pension reform, I know, would be done. I mean, I would have locked, it's the largest single important issue that has ever faced the state of Illinois. I would have locked everyone in the governor's residence, and that's a problem. Both Pat Quinn and Rod Blagojevich are sort of absentee. They're Chicago governors, not Springfield, but you lock everyone in the mansion.
Would you live down there? You live in the mansion
yes,
with the family?
yes.
You're going to
You
move
wanna
the
be
kids
the- you
down
wanna
there?
be
You're going
the
to disrupt their whole life? You got the first family, right?
Yeah, I do. But if you want to be the CEO of General Motors, you've got to be in Detroit, and I need to be 4 blocks from a Democrat-led legislature, of which I have a track record of being able to get a Democrat legislature. It's one of the reasons that I think I'm the best candidate for governor. I have a track record of getting a Democrat legislature to do things in its DNA that it doesn't do. I do believe that Speaker Madigan and Senator Cullerton would have let me do pension reform. They probably would have blamed me, the big bad governor, Republican governor, but I'm a big boy. But nothing would have gotten done, Jeff, until pension reform was finished, and it is just mind-boggling to me that Pat Quinn's been the governor for 5 years, and we don't have pension reform when his party controls the entire state of Illinois.
So what would it have looked like? Because it would have looked like the Madigan bill, the Cullerton bill, the Dillard bill. What do you think? Give us the basics. What would the state employee pension reform look like if you were king,
Well,
if you were governor?
something close to the Madigan bill, and I voted for the Madigan bill. It's the one that Ty Fainer of the Civic Federation and the Chicago Tribune wants. The numbers work. It's not a perfect bill, but everybody has to do more. You're going to have to work longer. Current employees are going to have to contribute more. We can't have a cost of living adjustment that's compounded greater than the rate of inflation. And the state's got to live up to its commitments to make its payments that are due.
Would you have frozen that COLA, that cost of living adjustment, at 0 initially? Would you have kept it no COLA initially?
Yes.
Would that have to be possibly for 5 or 10
The
years?
COLA is one of the largest problems. And the speaker he's got a cap in terms of how many years you work is you get the COLA on the first amount of money. What I'm looking for, Jeff, is something that works. When I was Jim Edgar's chief of staff, the credit rating of the state of Illinois for the first time in the state's history in our administration was raised. And we need our credit rating back. We need to get pension reform behind us because it's stifling economic development. Nobody wants to move their business or expand their business here, and we're losing businesses, knowing that we have $100+ billion of pension debt. It's a killer in private sector job creation.
Okay, and on that pension, you'd focus on the COLA because that's where the driver.
I'd focus on everything, but
On
the
everything, but the COLA is
is
the key
a
thing.
large piece of that.
And you'd probably, as you said, no more compounding, freeze it initially, and then once you get to something you can handle, when you can have a COLA, it's going to be a true cost of living. It's not going to be 3% a year, which it has been historically, right?
Correct. And Jeff, you've got to go back, just like I do. In fact, it's funny, I have a Fidelity, not to advertise for a company, but I have a Fidelity product that is my retirement at my law firm. And I look at that periodically. The state of Illinois can't every 20 years just say, wow, we have a problem here. You've got to watch, just like you have to educate our state's largest expenditure constantly, you've got to watch your unfunded liability, and you've got to focus on your retirement plans for state employees.
Do you have to move toward a defined contribution instead of a defined benefit plan? You know, your colleagues in the House, at least, Jeannie Ives and Morrison,
Right, I just met
they've
with
got a bill.
Representative Morrison. In a perfect world, that's the way the private sector does it, and that's how government needs to go. We cannot sit there and have these public pension plans, which are unaffordable, with a defined benefit any longer.
All right. So we mentioned the Speaker Madigan thing at the beginning of the show, and it was a little funny. Okay, did he get caught with his pants down? But in essence, now we're keeping that to 30 seconds. There's a mess at Metra. It's not a really gigantic financial issue in the same sense that the state employee pension is, but it is a mess. It is inefficient. But is the thing why the media are focusing so much on it? Is it symbolic of all that's wrong in the state of Illinois?
It's symbolic of the cadence of corruption that is evolved in the state of Illinois. And we have numerous entities looking at it. When I announced for governor, I said there's federal money in that railroad, and the federal government ought to look at it as well. But it's symbolic and it's unacceptable. I mean, you cannot have politicians, using a publicly funded railroad system as their political piggy bank. And
is that what Speaker Mike Madigan was doing?
Well, I don't know. I mean, we're going to find out what he was doing. But I will tell you that whoever replaces Mr. Clifford, who got the big buyout, and that's just an obscene amount, correct, the obscene amount of money that he was given to
3 times his annual salary.
It's outrageous. Just
but he didn't do
outrageous,
anything
Jeff.
wrong. Wasn't the setup there that he was told his contract wouldn't be renewed because he was bucking people like Madigan who wanted to give people salary increases?
That some members of that board just wanted him to go away, sort of like the Cubs wanted to get rid of Carlos Marmel.
So they were making a business decision.
As their, as the relief pitcher, they were willing to pay him anything to go away, and also, as some have alleged, Jack Schaefer from McHenry County, who's a board member of Metra, calls it hush money. But we need a professional railroad person. Mr. Clifford came from Los Angeles, another big city, but he was a bus guy. We need a professional railroad person to run Metra, which is the lifeblood of our suburban commuters. My district is heavily reliable on Metra. I have my Metra pass in my wallet. So Metra is still a good railroad, but we should settle for nothing less than perfect.
Do you have to completely reorganize it? Is it too much control to politicians to appoint their person? So you get somebody from Kane County, somebody from Will,
I am
somebody
always
from
open,
Cook,
Jeff,
Lake.
to discussing how we structure the governance system of our mass transit, but it has to be fair and balanced. I mean, the system, the RTA is not perfect, but it does guarantee some financial balance between suburbanites and the city. I know that one of the Democrat candidates for governor wanted the governor to appoint the members of Met. The problem with that is, the city of Chicago Democrats control everything in Springfield today, and that would essentially give total control of Metra, which is really a suburban thing, to the city of Chicago, and that's not good for suburbanites.
So you're not so sure you want to change the current system, which does give power to various counties, including the collar counties.
It's set up
and
to
gives
assure
a
financial
dispersion.
fairness.
Okay, so that may not have to be changed. You may have to monitor it better. You may have to make sure Speaker Mike Madigan can't pick up the phone and raise the salary of somebody, right?
Correct.
Okay. What makes you tick? Because we can talk about your background. People know you worked for Jim Edgar. You were the chief of staff for Jim Edgar. You were Jim Thompson's legislative affairs director. You put a stint on the Court of Claims, so you've been a judge in a sense. In a sense, you've been a judge. You've been a senator, state senator for 20 years. Your slogan is tested and prepared. So relative to Rauner, who's never held elected office, relative to Brady, you're pretty similar to Brady in the sense that you've both been state senators for a long time, but you do have experience working for governors. And you think that has helped you?
What makes me tick, Jeff, is I love the state of Illinois. I went to college in the cornfields of Macomb at Western Illinois University, law school under the elevated tracks at DePaul. I am all Illinois all the time. And I have a unique background, which we will talk about in a little bit. But I love this state, and I'm not going to be part of the first generation that sits around and watches the Chicago Democrats pile drive this state, both fiscally as well as corruption, as well as economically, into the ground. And I'm 58 years old. I still have a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old, and the vision of Illinois is very much affected by my children, whether it's school safety, whether it's college tuition, whether it's how they're going to compete against India and China in a global environment. So what makes me tick is I love this state. We're the capital of the Midwest. Nobody has McCormick Place or O'Hare Airport or our commuter rail system that we just talked about. We should not be rated 48th in economic outlook. I was just in Davenport, Iowa.
Why are we rated 48th in the economic outlook?
Primarily because we have a cost of business in this state and a reputation that makes us non-competitive with the rest of the Midwest. I have a plan, I had it last time I ran for governor, to make us a destination economy for people who create jobs. We're over-regulated, we are overtaxed, we are feed to death.
Does that mean you favor repealing the 67% increase in the state income tax?
Yes. We need a flat,
the law says it'll sunset
tax.
In part in 2005. You would go further and repeal the whole thing?
The Senate Republicans have a plan, and you can go to my website, you can go to my leader, Senator Christine Radogno's website.
Your website's kirkdillard.com?
Go to kdillard.com.
Okay.
The governmental website has the Senate Republican plan in there, but I do encourage people to go to kirkdillard.com.
Okay.
And if you ask what makes me tick, go to kirkdillard.com. Look at my 2.5 summary of what makes Kirk Dillard tick on there. That's my political
But you do favor the repealing the entire 2%
Senate Republicans
increase
have a plan,
for on the individual
but the
level.
longer the Democrats wait, and the more they heap, and they just put another 350,000 people on Medicaid, Jeff, for Obamacare, the harder it is to repeal that. But we must reduce the cost.
So Quinn says that's paid for mostly by the federal government. Is that wrong?
The next governor, he's right for 2 years.
Okay.
But the next governor of this state, and then you and I, who pay taxes here, and everybody watching, has a $3 to $4 billion welfare balloon note coming. And that's already on top of $8 billion of operating bills the state of Illinois
So
can't
you'd roll them
pay.
back. You're saying that those people should not have been added to the Medicaid rules.
I voted no, as did every Republican, to putting another 350,000 people on Obamacare, on Medicaid. We can't afford what we have today. We have $8 billion of unpaid bills around.
Can those people afford to get?
Jeff,
can those people afford to get their health care in the private sector?
They may, but we should not be expanding Medicaid. We cannot afford it. And the other thing we have to do, and there was just a massive study a couple of days ago, fraud. The New York Times, not exactly, Jeff, a conservative newspaper, estimates that 10% of all of Medicaid is fraud. And then they said, you can imagine what it's like in a place like Illinois. You could have a couple of $1 billion savings if somebody's managing Medicaid. And nobody's managing the store. A recent study on Governor Quinn said that he's within 2 days of spending more time in foreign countries, visiting foreign countries, than he has at the mansion in Springfield.
Okay. So that may differentiate from Quinn. Quinn favored this income tax increase. He actually told people about it, I think, before he was elected.
All of the Senate Republicans and all of the House Republicans voted no on a 67% income tax
you
increase.
And Rauner and Rutherford, you're telling me, and Brady, basically the same. You think all of you would like to repeal the increase in income tax. Is that right?
My guess is that's what you're going to hear from all of us.
Okay. So what is it that differentiates you? Is there any substantive, I know that you have a different background, you have different experience, different visions possibly, but we'll get to the vision in a second. But are there any substantive issues, economic issues, social issues that you think really differentiates you from Rauner? Let's take Rauner.
Well, I have a written plan to make us a
Well,
destination
he'll probably have a written
economy.
plan too.
And that's fine.
How do you think you differ from Bruce Rauner? Let's
I'm
go one
proven
by one.
and I'm tested. I've run the government of this state once before. As Jim Edgar's chief of staff, he's endorsed me once again for governor. And why is that important? It's important because during a Democrat legislature, I inherited in the Edgar administration, we had great people from top to bottom working, and Governor Edgar was a tremendous governor. We inherited a $1 billion deficit in a recession, and we left a $1.5 billion surplus in the state treasury. Can you imagine that? A $1.5 billion surplus. We paid our bills in 17 days. I said our credit rating for the first time in Illinois history went up. Could you imagine that? There's been 12 or 13 downgrades of our state's credit. It's the lowest in America under that Quinn. It actually went up under us. But most importantly, our unemployment rate was well below the national average, a 30-year low. So I have a proven record, which no one else does in this race, of getting a Democrat legislature to do things it's not in its DNA, like live within its means to do. And that's what sets me apart, as well as a track record of being able to know how to navigate the legislature. Another thing that sets me aside is I have lived and worked in all of the different parts and regions of Illinois. This is an incredibly diverse and complex state. And as you know, because you were there, and I thank you for being there, I announced for governor in front of a 3-flat gray stone on the north side of Chicago, where my immigrant grandfather lived on one floor, my Uncle Bill and his family on another.
A few blocks from Wrigley Field and Waveland Avenue.
And my grandfather worked in a factory at Midway Airport for 50 years. And like so many Illinoisans, we migrated to the suburbs. My mother was the chief nurse, surgical nurse at Hines Hospital, Veterans Hospital for years. Went to Cornfield, the University, Western Illinois University in Macomb, where I still stay very active, and I've lived in Springfield. So I know how the various puzzle pieces fit together, and your audience doesn't go to Southern Illinois, but Southern Illinois is very different than downstate Illinois. And having family down there and a mother who was raised in Kentucky, I understand that culture. So I am the one person that I believe can make this state work again, in a track record of being able to work with a Democrat-led legislature, whether I want it to be Democratic or not. And the rest of these guys who are in this race don't have that proven track record.
Now, Bill Brady says you can remove the income tax and fill that $5 billion gap that you lose by cutting the income tax rate, by attracting business, by generating income that will be taxed on the corporate level, more people will be working, taxed on the individual level. So he says expand the base on which the lower tax rate applies. You agree with Senator Brady on that?
On some of that. I mean, I am a Republican, Jeff, and I believe that the best way, aside from managing your budget, and believe me, I've got to get in there and manage Medicaid. It's our state's largest expenditure. We spend more on Medicaid than we do on education, and I have managed Medicaid well before in an innovative fashion. So you got to shrink the size of your government, and you got to grow your economic activity. If you're somebody who's watching that believes we need more money in the state treasury, the way I would put it in there was to grow our economy so that people, when they go out to eat or they go see a movie or they're buying things, are putting money in the treasury because they're employed and because they're buying things from their wages that they have from working. So that's the Republican philosophy. But this government needs to shrink, and we need to reduce the cost of doing business in the state of Illinois, or we will be uncompetitive as we are today with the rest of the states around us, including another change in workers' compensation that is another real huge impediment to business expansion in Illinois.
There are people who are striking some. They say they need to double the minimum wage in Illinois from, I guess, is it $8.25 now? It's above the federal minimum wage. I think they want to see it like $15. Is that ridiculous?
This is Milton Friedman week. Since you're a University of Chicago guy, I believe in free markets. And my vision of Illinois is to have no one raise a family on a minimum wage. Minimum wage workers are students. They are people that need part-time work. And when you raise the minimum wage, you hurt the very people that should benefit from minimum wage. And the minority community, I believe, gets hurt by a raise in the minimum wage more than anyone else. There are a lot of jobs that will go unfilled that need to be filled. And my vision of this state is to have good paying jobs with benefits, not minimum wage jobs. And no one, again, should be raising a family of 4 on a minimum wage. You got to keep your eye on what a minimum wage is meant to do. And I believe in the free market, and the free
Friedman
market
would
ought
say,
to set that
don't
minimum
raise
wage.
the minimum wage. He would say, if people have low incomes, have a net income tax, supplement their income, but let them work and earn as much as they can at the free market wage. Basically agree with Milton Friedman on that?
You know, if you want to get into what our income tax structure works, if one of your questions is, am I for, and I don't call it a progressive income tax, I call it a regressive income tax. I am for, if Illinois has to have an income tax, a low, flat income tax.
No, you don't favor amending the Constitution, so we could have a progressive income tax.
That progressive income tax is a massive income tax increase.
All right. On the social issues, you know, you're pro-life, right?
Yes.
Unabashedly pro-life.
Yes.
You would allow exceptions for the life of the mother if that were an issue. A woman could have an abortion. You would allow an exception for rape and incest. But other than that, if you could change the law, you would, to restrict abortions other than those 3 cases. Is that right?
Yeah, that's how historically I've always filled out my questionnaires. I am pro-life. You know, we just had a good ruling from the Illinois Supreme Court. And again, I'm the parent of a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old daughter. And I don't care whether you're pro-choice or not, and overwhelmingly I believe the public agrees with me that you ought to have notice before
Parental
your minor.
notice.
And
we have a law, it just hasn't been enforced. We have a parental
20
notice
years,
law.
Jeff.
Right.
You're like me. I mean, you follow the courts. It took 20 years.
It's now going to be enforced,
It's
right?
finally going to be enforced. You know, if you have to give permission to have your child get an aspirin at school, you know, at least you ought to know whether your child's going to go through a major surgical procedure like an abortion. So, yes, I'm pro-life.
You know, the Chicago law that said people couldn't possess a gun in their home, that was struck down. That said that was in contradiction. That was violated the Second Amendment, and so they had to modify that so people could own a gun and possess it in their home. You folks in the legislature, you're ordered by the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals to adopt some form of concealed carry. That was adopted recently. I assume you support that,
Yes.
and you're happy that occurred.
Yes. I mean, a federal court ordered us, Jeff. We're the only state in America that didn't allow you to protect yourself outside of your home. And first of all, it's your constitutional right to do that. And there is a training requirement. There is a mental health background check. So it's not, there are safeguards in there. It was a negotiated bill, long and hard, in a bipartisan fashion. And last but not least, I always believe you keep the criminal guessing. I stopped, and I put in legislation to stop Lisa Madigan, who wanted to give the names and addresses, or at least the addresses of those, or names, but you wanted to give out who had FOID cards, the firearm owner's ID card, and which is putting out a blueprint for people to know who to burglarize and who not to burglarize.
So you want to keep them guessing whether you have a gun or not. And so same thing with concealed carry. If somebody's walking down an alley and it's unsafe, and that person says a woman with a gun in her purse, that criminal's got to guess, does that woman have a gun? You're in favor of that kind of approach with concealed carry, is
Well,
that
I
right?
wish we didn't have to have that kind of approach.
But you have a lot of
But
unsafe areas, right?
I do believe, and Professor Lott, another University of Chicago professor, you know, has had and done studies that show that concealed carry reduces crime. But the bottom line is, Jeff, it's your constitutional right. In the Seventh Circuit, a very fine appellate court in America, one of the best, most learned, said that's your right, and they ordered us to do it in the General Assembly.
Same-sex marriage, you're opposed?
Yes.
You're opposed to civil unions?
Civil unions, it depends on how it would be drafted. I'm for equality.
We now have civil unions in the state of Illinois.
That's one of the reasons. There are many that I voted against gay marriage, but we have civil unions, and you know, I oppose gay marriage.
Will this election be about the social issues or the economic issues?
It better be about the economic issues. I mean, I am laser focused on the economy, and again, I'm the one person that has a proven track record of putting the state financially back on track, and they are intertwined, Jeff. We have an unemployment rate where 1 in 10 people is unemployed. You know, Iowa's unemployment rate is less than half of ours, and until we fix our broken financial situation in Springfield, get us back on sound footing like when I ran the Edgar administration, we're never going to have the job growth that a state that is the capital of the Midwest ought to have.
Okay, so if you're pro-life and you're conservative on the economic issues, you sort of have an image, especially with the mainstream media, of being a moderate. Do you embrace that image, and what is that based on?
You know, I think it's based on the fact, Jeff, that I'm thoughtful, I'm reasonable, I'm a regular guy, you know, I am accessible. You know, the fact that I'm doing your show when other candidates wouldn't do it.
We hope, like Bruce Rauner and Dan Rutherford would come here. Bill Brady has come here.
I listen
and we appreciate
well,
that you've come here.
And I go into communities that a lot of Republicans don't do. I mean, I was in Lawndale. I was with African American ministers 3 times this week. And so, you know, a lot of that reputation has to do with the fact that I listen. I always respect people regardless of what their beliefs are, and I will be a governor of all of the state of Illinois.
Now, if the Republicans come back to
everyone.
power, you get it, and if you start building, I don't know if you can get a majority in the State House or the Senate.
It's going to be
but
hard.
If you start gaining on that, and that might be because the state is in kind of a mess, I think people would say objectively on the economic side. It's going to take independents voting for you, Democrats voting for you or whoever the Republicans are that they elect. And Eric Zorn, Chicago Tribune columnist, he wonders if moderate independents and Democrats can trust you folks not to have, as he puts it, an anti-abortion jihad once you get power. He says that happens. You folks get in power in various parts of the country and you forget the economic issues you run on. And his words, Zorn says, you go on an anti-abortion jihad.
Well,
what do you say?
I'm going to be focused almost entirely on getting our state's solvency back as a state government, giving us integrity and decency, and ending this cadence of corruption that Illinois has had, and then making us a destination economy for job creation. And you know, most of those social issues are driven by the United States Supreme Court, but I'm laser focused on the economy and making Illinois financially work again. So Eric ought to relax.
Okay, and this corruption thing, everybody always talks about it. The U.S. Attorney, Patrick Fitzgerald, when he was there, put away so many people, including 2 former governors,
Right.
okay? And yet it doesn't seem to change. It just goes on, and everybody runs on it. Why should people think that you're going to make a difference on having less corruption in government?
Because I've always led by example on ethics. When I announced for governor, and you were there, you heard one of the things I said I would do is I would close down my campaign account, because I believe the state is in such dire straits that the governor needs to spend all his time or her time governing, not fundraising. I passed the first major
Close
ethics
it down
bill.
for how long?
At least 2 to 2.5 years,
All right.
until I decided if I deserve re-election or wanted to run for re-election. But no fundraising for a couple years. But Jeff, I passed long before we had all of this cadence of corruption brought to the public's attention. I sponsored the first major ethics bill with the late U.S. Senator Paul Simon in the state's history. 25 years.
We're going to continue to speak as the credits roll by.
Okay.
So much want to thank State Senator Kirk Dillard for
Jeff.
coming here.
It's great to be here. I'm
discussing
glad you
the
got rid
issues.
of that North Carolina mug and you got the University of Chicago.
We're back here on track. All right. And of course, Kirk Dillard is running for governor in the Republican primary. He's facing Bruce Rauner. He's facing State Senator Bill Brady. He's facing State's Treasurer Dan Rutherford. And then if you win that, it's going to be you going against Quinn, going against Bill Daley, or Kwame Raoul, or somebody else.
I take one election cycle at a time, Jeff, and my message is going to be unique skills proven and tested.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.